Okay, we're live on air. Welcome everyone to our 6th Hangout, and today we have with us Roland and Almita Vamos, professors of violin and viola here at Northwestern University. Mrs. Vamos is a 6-time recipient of the Presidential Excellence in Teaching Award and winner of the ASTA's Distinguished Service Award, plus Chautauqua and Concert Artists Guild Awards. She has been named a Distinguished Teacher by the National Endowment for the Arts Teachers for the Arts. She is also a teacher not only here at Northwestern, but the Music Institute of Chicago. She studied with Mishikoff and Persinger at Juilliard. And Mr. Vamos, who will be with us in a little bit, is a former member of the Houston Dallas Symphony Radio City Music Hall Orchestra and Contemporary String Quartet. He is also a recipient of ASTA's Distinguished Teacher in the Arts Award. He serves on juries of national and international competitions. He currently teaches here at Northwestern and at the Music Institute. He studied with Shumsky and Linzer and got his DMA from the Juilliard School. So welcome, Mrs. Vamos. It's so wonderful to have you here with us, and we're very excited.
I'm excited to be here. And I think you want me to start talking.
Yes, Mrs. Vamos is going to demonstrate and talk about technique, their basic technique, and she is also going to be demonstrating and talking about the major concertos, and she's going to give us her sequence of concertos and everything that we want to know about them. So welcome, Mrs. Vamos, and let's get started.
Okay, so in 1 hour I'm going to tell you everything. It took me 70 years to learn. I'd like to explain that it's going to be on a superficial level because it's not going to be hours and hours on how to draw a straight bow. But I thought before the topic was, we started out with the idea of doing first the beginnings of all the many of the major concertos for violin, because I spend so much time on openings, and probably as much time on the opening, let's say, of the Mendelssohn as I do of the rest of the whole first movement. So I thought I would just start with a little bit of some of the basic things that I teach, even when I start young students, but I find that through college, sometimes we have to go back and rethink about how we're going to draw the bow or how to make a more beautiful legato. And of course, you've been doing these things all along, but they pop up in pieces, and we have to rethink about how we're going to draw the bow and how we're going to change the bow at the tip and at the frog. A little bit more about posture, because sometimes we grow and our posture changes. So very briefly, I'm going to talk about something that I feel is talked about too much, but probably not enough also, and that is, I'm going to show you what I have on my violin. I have an example of two things. I don't use both simultaneously, but sometimes I just use a little little sponge. Sometimes I use the shoulder rest, depending on how I feel or the situation of how my vibrato is doing, and I find that it sometimes makes a little bit of a difference. I'm not really keen on saying use one or don't use one. I feel that it's very individual. It depends on the student. It depends on their build and everything, and often needs some changing as this student grows. The other thing I wanted to start out with was just talking about basics of drawing the bow across the string, because very often I see the bow, even as you get older and you're trying to make different colors, that the bow has a tendency to wander. And as you get to the tip, there's a tendency to slip towards the fingerboard. So whether you're playing in the middle of the bow, I don't know if you can see me, or if you're playing, I mean not the middle of the bow, or the middle of the strings, or if you're playing at the fingerboard for soft, what I don't like is when the bow starts to angle. So lately I've noticed that when I discuss the bowing with, especially with the younger students, I've been talking, instead of saying go forward at the tip, go forward at the tip, I've been talking about arching a little bit at the beginning and then just going straight out. So on the G string, I would arch because the violin is at an angle even at the frog, if I arch a little bit at the frog, then I don't have to feel like I'm pulling out so much. This was a new discovery of mine. I think it's been working, and I'm going to keep trying to see if it's the best way to get the bow to go parallel to the bridge. Now, in the olden days,
can I ask a quick question? When you say arch, exactly what do you mean?
Okay.
Samuel, do you want to come back a little bit so they get a fuller view? Yeah. Like that.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now, as I'm going, when I start at the frog, my wrist is slightly in. If it's out, I don't know if you can see, if it's like this, it goes at an angle. So as soon as I leave the frog, I start, instead of going back like this, I come a little bit, just so slightly, ever so slightly forward, and then I just continue the stroke because I'm going in the right direction. Now, in each string, the violin is a little further away, so I find that I might arch, but it's just a little bit. If I do too much, then I'm going like this. So I have a way of checking to see if my bow is parallel to the bridge by just looking at the strings, and I call it the letter H. If I'm on the A string and the D string shows the same amount of hair of string length as the E string, then I know my bow is parallel. If I look at the tip and I look at the frog, I know nothing. I can't see. But if I look right in front of me, I can tell. Now, you get pretty bleary-eyed if you keep staring at the string. So eventually, you just have to close your eyes and feel that you're in the grain.
Mm-hmm.
We used to call it a straight bow, and it was pointed out to me that, you know, it's not really a straight bow. But whatever it is, it's parallel to the bridge, and it's also not a slidey sound. Because you start the Bruch Concerto and you're doing something like this, you know, you don't want to hear the next note. So that's one of the first things. I'm not going into great detail because there's so much to talk about, but bowing direction is really important. Now, the other thing is, if you start playing these more advanced concertos, and I'm saying even accolade, anything you play, you want to do everything correctly. So if you're going to be playing long notes and you have to have a legato, you should start teaching a beautiful legato. I wouldn't say that you start out with Twinkle talking about legato, but you certainly, when you're doing the Bruch Concerto. Now, a very brief description of what I call legato, or how I try to get the students to play legato, is that when you, for instance, at the tip, when you change the bow, instead of just going back, I make a little slight angle away from me if it's very soft, so that I'm actually taking off some of the hairs so you don't hear the bow change. You lighten up. And somebody once described it as a slight diminuendo, where you can keep the sound going, but you have a little bit, here's more legato, here's less legato. You can hear that. So, and at the frog, I start out usually, because it's heavy, unless I'm playing very fast bow and I want that heavy sound, I usually start out with the bow stick tilted a little bit, but immediately I'll flatten the bow. And then when I get to the tip, right before changing, I'll take my thumb and I'll pull the frog towards me like this. I can't see. Where am I? Here it is.
There we are.
I do a little in with the pull the bow, and then the stick is a little bit away from me, and I come back. Now on the way back, I don't flatten the bow again. I just come in because I don't need it flattened. It sounds funny if you start going back and forth. But you do need a little bit more weight as you're going away from the frog, so that's why I like to flatten the bow. Of course, if it's pianissimo, I don't. We have very little way of making big dynamic changes. So it's partially by how much hair you use, partially about the bow speed, whether you're closer to the bridge, or the kind of vibrato you use. And that's pretty much the way we change our dynamic level. Closer to the bridge, further from the bridge, flatter bow, less hair, more hair. Turn the stick towards you sometimes to get even more weight, and turn the stick away to get less weight. So these are the things that I'm using, these techniques in teaching the advanced concertos as well as the younger students. Another thing that, as I said, I'm going very briefly, but if there are questions, we can go back to these things. Intonation. I was very lucky that at a pretty young age, when I studied with Mishakov, he had a terrific ear, and he was very fussy about intonation. Basically, he didn't articulate very much how he wanted me to play. He pushed my hand in place and scolded me if I was out of tune. So I developed a much better sense of pitch. I call it tuning. If you have a good sense of pitch, that's fine. If you don't, you develop it by always listening to that perfect ring in the note. Practicing very slowly and very softly. Remember that. That's the way I practice when I want to fix my pitch. But what he did teach me was a map of the instrument. And for me, this is very important. Now, whatever I say, if you know something else, it's great, as long as you have a system that works. It's not one system for everybody, but this really works for me. Knowing, first of all, keeping the wrist straight. I don't change my wrist position when I'm playing. If I vibrate, I open out, but I'm not pulling back or going forward like this. As I go up, my fingers get closer together, and when they get closer together, when I'm on the E string, I actually can touch this side of the instrument in third position. If I'm in the G string, I'll touch, but I'll touch a little further out. When I say, talk about the touch system, I mean if your fingerboard is black, you're a blind man, like Galamian said, it's blind, so you have to have a feel of the instrument as you go so you know where you are. Now, it does not mean that when you're vibrating, you're contacting on two sides of the fingerboard. You let go. But as you're shifting, you can always feel the instrument. So if I'm going up through fourth, I usually feel the instrument and then I pull away as I'm vibrating. If I'm vibrating the whole time, I'm just very lightly against the instrument. If I'm going up to fifth position, what I do is I prepare my hand before I shift because I'm coming around the instrument. Now, when I go to, let me see if I can demonstrate a little bit. So fourth position, I'm right, my hand is against the bouts. When I'm fifth, I come around and my first finger is a little bit below where the bouts meet the fingerboard. Sixth is a little above. Seventh, I'm facing on the left side of the finger again. First position through fourth, my fingers are placed on the inside corner or left side of the finger, as Galamian says. In fifth, my hand turns around, unless I'm following through to the upper positions. This is a little bit unclear. So if I'm going to go just through fifth and continuing, I don't turn my hand so much. But if I'm staying in fifth, I'm usually no longer playing with my fingers on the left side, but sort of in the middle. So this, I mean, has to be clarified at every lesson for a long time. One of the best ways to learn the positions is to do the Schradig Book 1 from beginning to end. I start with that very slowly. We don't go through fast, and it's to learn all the positions, to feel the positions, and that's a book that I discovered people can use for the whole life. They can start at a very early age. You can start at the age of 6 or 7 even, but maybe not go up to 7th position if you're not ready. But also I've met professionals who say that's the one book they carry around with them for their whole life, to just like you practice scales for your whole life. So intonation, knowing your positions is very, very important. So if you start out, you're playing, let's say, Beethoven Concerto, you're going to 3rd position, the 2nd, 4th. I know exact 6th position. I know exactly my positions. Now, when you're young, you have to think about what position you are. When you're done it for years, you just go to that position. You know it's automatic. In fact, everything you do technically, you want to make it automatic so that when you perform, you're thinking more about your performance, how to make it most beautiful that day. You don't want to think about technical things. That's done in the practice room. Let me see. So I've talked very briefly about the positions. I'll get back to this when we talk about the concertos and everything, but this is just an introduction. So with the intonation again, The fingers are placed not in the middle, but sort of on the left side. You can see your where you make your indentation. Most of the time, my callus is on the left side of the finger. Shifting, very important. Shifting, I think, is, if you know your positions, is not so hard. The basic idea is that if you're changing bows, you shift on the new bow. If you're on the same bow, if you're going to shift, let's say, 3, or on the one bow, I just get rid of. I know where I'm going. I know where this note is. I quickly put this finger down. My husband calls it an exchange of fingers. Instead of going 1, 3, you go 1, 3, and in the Gaylord Yost, you go to find it. But one thing he misses is what happens when you don't want to hear that first finger. So you have to practice it without. It's a matter of going lightly, quickly, at the last second when you want to play the new note. And shifting should not be heard unless you want it to be heard. So if you have a shift that you want to sound very beautifully, there are several ways of making the shift very beautifully. Okay, now, any questions up to here? Because I'll get to the order of pieces. All right, yes.
No, I was going to ask if, whenever you're demonstrating, if you could actually pull back a little bit so we can actually see your hand. Like, it's a little bit out of the picture.
So when I was talking about shifting, what I meant was that I know where my third position is, and I shift not before the note, and I release the first finger, or second finger, whatever finger I'm playing on, so that you don't hear the shift in between. It's just a matter of, shifting is a matter of timing and listening, and sometimes I'll just say erase the shift. I don't want to hear it, just erase it. And the students usually understand. Order of pieces, I wanted to mention that first. So, you know, I'm a big fan of the Suzuki method, or any other method that has a good philosophy and makes sense. I'm not so fussy. When I first heard about these methods, I was younger, and usually when people are younger, they question a lot and they turn a sour face. But now that I'm older, I realize that one should be really knowledgeable about something before they talk about it. So I had to teach the Suzuki program at Western Illinois University, so I had to learn it. And I remember Doris Crusoe teaching it, and a few things she said that I love. And this goes for any good method. It doesn't have to be the Suzuki method. But number one is that you don't teach things that the student's not ready. They should learn perfectly from the beginning. You don't let them play sloppy and jump ahead. Well, I was taught that way, and they'd never heard of Suzuki at the time. He probably wasn't born yet. No, maybe he was. Then the other thing is that besides that, she was talking about the philosophy, and I was brought up by a teacher who didn't have the Suzuki philosophy, but it was everything that he said you couldn't argue with. I mean, just being gentle, encouraging, and I really believe that's 3/4 of getting a student to play well is to make them know that they can play well. And you can be very strict, but you're very strict, but you know that they can do it and that they will do it, and not to ever make them feel like it's not going to happen. They have to agree to practice. By the way, practicing is an important part of it. The order of pieces, I love the fact that he had a system at the beginning that you didn't have to go looking in a bunch of books to find, the next tune. Teachers have a wonderful way of introducing other pieces into it doesn't have to be just the method. When I taught it, I was very often very naughty about some of the things I did, like teaching reading a little too soon, perhaps, for somebody else, but that's another story. I don't want to get into that. Not very, I'm quite open, order of pieces. After you've gone through most of the books, you don't have to go through all of the books. So I love the Seitz concertos. I like the early Baroque and Vivaldi concertos. I like the Bach concertos a little later on. If they're quite difficult, they could be learned much later, or you could learn a couple of movements early. And then I love the Accolade Concerto. I think it's a great concerto, and it's a good, it almost sounds like the Bruch Concerto in the beginning. As I said, the sides and Viotti concertos. My favorite is Viotti number 22. That comes later. That's quite difficult. But it could be before Bruch because Bruch musically is quite difficult. And there's Mozart G Major Concerto, which I like to use. Some people probably use some of the earlier Mozart concertos. Haydn Concerto. Again, you have to know the student because you can have one student who might have to play easier concertos longer, and another student who you can jump a little bit faster because they practice more and they have more time to maybe to practice. So when I get, let's say, a 10-year-old, and if I feel, or 11-year-old, and I feel like when Rachel Barton came to study with us, she was doing Bruch Concerto. She was definitely ready for Bruch Concerto. But an interesting thing is that, and my husband was questioned, we used to teach all the students. I would teach them, let's say, work on repertoire or some of the repertoire, and he would work on some, just maybe technique. And with Rachel, who was definitely ready for probably Paganini at the time, he took her back and he gave her early Wolfart, Mazes, and some of these early Etude books because she had never had them. And somebody said, why would you give Rachel those exercises? She's way too advanced. And he says, well, they have little techniques that maybe she missed, so we could do 4 or 5 exercises in 1 week, which she liked. She could sight read, she could play them more musically, and now, in her older age, she's recording the Wolfart exercises in a musical fashion. So he was teaching her a little bit about harmony, a little bit about changes of harmonies and everything as she was playing. And she doesn't regret that she did, and when she teaches, at least she's familiar with some of those early exercises, which she hadn't done. It didn't hurt her technique any. Now, the order of pieces after we get to Bruch Concerto, I have like 3 sections. Dorothy DeLay had 2. I've sort of put it into 3. The early section of the advanced player is Bruch, Mendelssohn, and not necessarily in this order. Mendelssohn, Wieniawski could be, depending on whether I've been teaching too much Mendelssohn, I might give somebody Wieniawski, you know, it's enough. And then there's Lalo, very difficult concerto. If I have a student who can play lickety-split and is good at fast notes, I might give them Lalo because I know they can do the last movement and show off nicely with that. Or I might give it to somebody who needs to learn how to play a little faster. So here, there's Vieuxtemps number 4, which I teach. I teach Vieuxtemps number 5, but there are other Vieuxtemps concertos which I'm not familiar with, but they're very teachable. I might insert Barber Concerto early, as I say. As long as the student is ready for it, it's not bad if you don't make a big mistake if you don't go in one particular order. In fact, that could be a mistake because you can get so tired of teaching something that you start missing things. So the main thing that I insist upon is that they learn all the movements. The only time I've been really guilty of not teaching all the movements is in the Viotti Concerto because I'm not so crazy about the last second movement or third movement. But once I get to Bruch and on, they have to learn all the movements. And they have to learn them so that I feel that their musical knowledge of the piece and their technical knowledge, while it will get much better, is almost of a professional level so that when they come back to it years later, they're not having to relearn it, but they're just making it better. Because I've had a student who learned Mendelssohn very poorly, and in college when we went back to it, I felt like, oh my gosh, we have to undo and then do, and that's a pain. So after we get finished with those concertos, I'll introduce, let's say, the second rung, Dvorak, Glazunov, to Prokofiev. These are very difficult. Can you not go and say they're in the third rung? Of course you can. It doesn't make any sense to think, but sometimes I like to avoid teaching Tchaikovsky early or Beethoven and Brahms for several reasons. One is that I think we all hold them in such esteem that once we get onto those concertos, Sibelius, Tchaikovsky, Brahms, and Beethoven, they might feel like they're going back, or they may not want it. So then they're just pushing ahead, and they may not be mature enough. Perhaps the Brahms concerto takes a little bit more stamina than perhaps a Prokofiev concerto. This is not to say Prokofiev is easier than Brahms. It's extremely difficult, but I just put them in the second rung. I think Delay put just 2 rungs, you know, after Lalo and Vutum and all of those. She had the second rung, and that's fine too. As I said, the main thing is I've had in auditions people coming in playing Tchaikovsky, and they don't play it so well. And when I look at their repertoire list, they studied Vivaldi A minor and then Tchaikovsky concerto. Some teachers say you can teach all the technique in the concertos. Why waste your time? But that's silly. That's just nonsense, and we all know that. It doesn't work. And there's no reason to jump people ahead, because then going back to Mendelssohn is a big... They think they're going back to an easy concerto. Forget that. It's not an easy concerto. Okay, so now, if there are any questions about basics and those things?
I think we do. I think we do start having questions. So, team, go ahead. Caroline?
Yeah, this is a question from Amy Hess. This is going back to your discussion about intonation and shifting and the touch points. So do you have any suggestions for how to assist students who are changing instrument sizes, where you have to reestablish that every time they grow?
Well, it's the same thing. It's the fortunately, you know, my teacher, he would pick up my half-size violin, and there is a rumor that he never played a note out of tune, but his intonation was better than Heifetz. I don't know if there's truth to that, but in all the years I knew him, he never played a note out of tune. So when he picked up the little instrument, third position was still here. So third position doesn't change. So you give me a viola, and there's third position for me. Fourth position is fourth position. Of course, every day, intonation is, you know, I pick up the violin when I play slowly. I find that I'm not in tune perfectly. I have to adjust each note. That's why I do practice slowly every day. When I do practice, I don't get a chance to every day, but when I do practice, I do a lot of slow, and I find out that every note I play has to sometimes have a little bit of an adjustment. So yes, when you change from one instrument to the other, it's a little difficult at first, because young children don't realize they haven't played all the different sizes. I know when I pick up a half-size violin, my fingers have to be much closer together. When you go from first position to third position, your fingers have to get much closer together. So it's a little bit like, for a little while, you're going a little bit backwards maybe with the intonation, but it shouldn't take long before the student starts adjusting to the new instrument. But nothing changes. That's why this is so good to have a touch point system, where you know where third is, you know where fourth is exactly. Where is your thumb in fourth position? Where is your thumb in third position? My thumb is a little bit, usually my thumb goes with the first finger in front of it or behind, depending on the student's hand. You can check it when you make a fist. If this thumb is up high, it would probably be a higher thumb. If it's back here, then the thumb would hang back a little bit. But I think that intonation is not something that you can say, now my student plays in tune. Good, I never have to think about it again. At every level, you're going to have that issue of adjusting. Maybe I'm taking a student violin and pick it up in my hand. Hopefully, by now, do you have your violin here?
I don't.
No. Well, I usually like to show the students, it's not bragging, and I tell them it's just a matter of, I can pick up your violin, and usually very quickly on any violin play the octaves fairly well in tune, but that's only because I have a touch point, and I know where I am on the violin, so I figure your instrument out. Any more questions?
Brittany, did you have some questions?
Yes. I am wondering if you said something about preparing your hand ahead of time for the fifth position, and I'm wondering if you could show us that. I think your hand was a little bit lower in the screen or something.
Okay, so Can you see it now? So when I'm in third, I'm here. When fourth. Now fifth, my thumb comes under the violin. I can feel the bout still, unless I'm vibrating and I'm pulling away, but I feel the bouts in my hand, but I'm no longer facing towards the bridge. My finger's facing a little bit away from the bridge. And everything changes. The vibrato's narrower as I start going up the positions. My first finger's a little below where. Okay, now do you see me better? Is this better?
Yes, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, so now I'm a little bit before the bouts meet. Sixth position, about where the bout meets. As sharp as almost about where the bout. I have a visual, but I don't usually. It's usually feel by now, but I do have a visual if the student wants to see exactly where they are on the instrument. And seventh position facing. After that, I call it no man's land because the thumb is not moving at all, and everything's very close. So I just have to have a kinesthetic feel of shifting. But I can actually see the difference between third, fourth, high third, and fourth is funny because sometimes my thumb is a little bit back, sometimes it's leaning against the, leaning right against the, what do you call this, the end of the neck of the violin. But, okay, where are we now? Did I answered fifth position, I hope.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, good. I think
Questions about fifth position, come see me.
I think let's go ahead with the concertos.
So Bruch concerto. Anyhow, so the first thing I might be talking about is when to get ready for the first note. Because when you're a little kid and you're doing Twinkle, you're standing like this for the whole introduction, and then you go. With the Bruch concerto, if you're like this, da 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 dee da, it looks really funny. So I have them prepare. Their bow is held in their hand, but it's actually, the hair is out like this, and it's down. And when they get to they hear the piano go, da 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 da, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they're there. So they're not standing over things. That's the first thing I teach. And then because it's free ad lib, this is where you can see the concerto is becoming a little bit more complex. It starts out with a little cadenza. So we have to talk about rhythm, because rhythm is usually played wrong. And whenever you have a cadenza, you still have to obey rhythm, because the composer, in all cadenzas, unless it's completely straight, just 16th notes, they put 8th notes, they put dotted notes. So the rubato is, I call it generic rubato. You take a little time at the beginning, and then you move a little, and you take a little time at the end. But you don't take time on a longer note or a dotted note. Those have to be in time. So it's basically you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I count 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Now you can move a little because it's a cadenza. So you can have, but when you get to the top note, it's the same as the 8. That's 3 and 4 and 1 and 3 and 4 and then you can slow up a little bit. So generic rubato is where you take a little time, you give a little time, you go away, you move a little bit, and then you give back the time at the end. So you could actually time it, and it would almost sound like you didn't take any time at all, because whatever you've taken, you've given back. And this is the kind of, I call it elastic rhythm. It's the kind of rhythm I use when I'm playing Bach and I'm being free, and maybe in when we're playing. What is the what's the word for it? Whatever it is. Anyhow, we'll get to that another time. So vibrato in the Bach, in the Bruch, I usually have them vibrate the first note. Now this morning I tried it, and I found with the third finger I didn't vibrate as well. So for me, I can easily go down. I have them vibrate every note. and also because it resolves, I put a little bit more weight on the F sharp than on the G. I don't go da da, but I'll lean on the F sharp, and then I start again a little faster the second group. And then there's a fourth finger. Usually I have to remind them you can vibrate the fourth finger too. Here's something interesting that came up today about whether your hand touches the instrument when you vibrate. Usually I'm away from the instrument, but when I'm playing faster notes like so I may just vibrate the finger, the first joint. Now, I have a nickname for the first joint. I call it the sweet talker because I think when the first joint is moving, it gives you a little bit more of that oscillation. It's a little sweeter. When you're in the higher positions, you definitely don't want to have the sweet talker working because it's too wide. So you have a narrower vibrato. You can still get sweetness, or you can pull away sometimes and not use the first joint and get a faster and a more passionate sound. But in the beginning of the Bruch, I like, so I'm not pulling away because I don't want such a fast vibrato. And then I'm just using the first joint, which I'm trying to make as loose as possible so we hear some of that oscillation, and it's just warmer then. So anyhow, in the second part of this, I usually explain, and sometimes I'll tell a story to a little child about the first one is a big fat king, because I like this note to have a kind of a strong sound, but not too strong. Some editions have piano, some have forte, but I like always openings to be present. And then I sort of talk about how he's pleading with the people in the land, and the second time he enters, he's kind of angry. So he's more forceful, and here I might use a nice strong arm vibrato. So by now, the student has been working on, when they play Bruch Concerto, I feel it's very strongly that they should have enough of a variety of vibrato and a good vibrato, or we are still working on it. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, and then gradually slowing up. Now, the next part is written in some editions up bow. I have decided, and by the way, I change my mind frequently about things, so if you disagree with your in your rights, because I disagree with myself all the time. I start down bow, so there's not a big break again here. But something interesting is, oh yeah, the next part, I let the students, if they, this is very fast. It's so fast. I let the kids enter a little earlier. I've heard Milstein actually enter early. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that gives them enough time to play every note early. Now, when we get to the next step is exposition. And frequently, it's out of tune. Anything can happen. So I've developed a system for this. 1, 2, on 4, they count. Their thumb goes to 6th position underneath the violin. On 1, they place their first finger above where the bouts meet, and then they add their third finger. So they can count. They have to be exactly in time. While they're futzing around looking for that note, they're still counting. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so they're then in position. But they know exactly where they're going, and they're counting at the same time. So everything's done. Not what I don't want to do, then they don't know when to come in because they've been so wondering about where to put their finger next. So all of that is done in timing. And then again, I give them a little extra time. Even for myself, I think it sounds a little garbled to play those 7 notes so fast. Instead of 1, 2, 3, I like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. On 1, I put my 4th finger where the 2 was, and then I add the first finger in 6th. do that very well. Now, the next thing I'll be talking about is the octaves. This was a wonderful thing I learned from a student of mine who studied with delay, all fingers down. The kids don't like it at first. They think they can't vibrato, but you can. And much more in between. Now I'm in third position. Third. Okay, so that covers pretty much the main things about the opening. Any questions about the opening of Bruch? No?
No, you know, I think in your edition here, in the second part where it has at the second solo ad lib that comes in, a lot of times that D to E is written as a quarter note, you know?
Oh, really?
I have it in some editions, but everybody plays this way.
4 and 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I think that sounds very nice.
Yeah, so that you have it
elongated anyhow because I feel like 3 and 1 and it sounds really funny. So I just take
yeah, you know what? No, wait a minute. Excuse me. This is how it's written, but everybody plays it the other way.
Right.
Yeah.
So I put something in between 3, 4 and 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But because it is a cadenza, so I'm a little bit in between, so nobody knows if I'm playing 8 notes or quarter notes.
Right.
And if they say you played, you know, they can't accuse me too much. And then when it comes back at the end, it's even, I think that it's even a little stranger. But I think if you can make it sound musical, there's a place in the Sibelius Concerto which the rhythm sounds funny unless you play it right. So if you play it faster, it's okay. Let's see how it sounds if we don't take time. Oh, this is the second note. 3, 4, and 1, 2, 1. Kind of sounds a little race to me, so I take a little liberty there. Yeah. But maybe not a full quarter note.
Right.
Okay, so that's the Bruch Concerto. I've just taught you the Bruch Concerto in 5 seconds. Not a feat. It doesn't happen that way. Okay, Mendelssohn Concerto. Well, this is a phenomenal concerto. It just is. But I had one student who accused me of keeping her on the first line for 3 years, but she had a tendency to exaggerate. It was maybe 3 months, I don't know. It was a long time. But in the olden days, we used to play a traditional very, very beautiful. It sounds lovely. It's not exactly what Mendelssohn wrote. And I was at a conference one place. We were doing master classes, and one of the teachers allowed the student to play it that way, which was very beautiful. But another teacher got pretty upset, and she said, that's not what Mendelssohn wrote. It's true. Mendelssohn has, yes, this is not slurred. This is, well, you know what? It can be played very much the same way, doing it Mendelssohn's way. You just make it very legato. And I find it much easier to follow the Mendelssohn bowing because then you don't have to worry so much. This is separate 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I used to have a hard time between the break and the bow and the 8th note, getting the 8th note to fit in with the 8th notes in the orchestra. So that was an issue. Now it's a little easier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So the biggest issue is the shifting. I like the Mendelssohn to be very pure and very simple. I don't like to hear a lot of slides. And the opening is very difficult. Here's where knowing where 4th position is comes in very handy. Many times I hear this. Which is kind of old-fashioned sounding, isn't it? But I don't like it. So there's another thing is when you're shifting to 4th finger, often the finger is too low. I like the finger to, like, I call it an archway. You lift the finger, and it's almost there. It's ready, and you exchange the first for the fourth finger. And then here I prepare my thumb around, and I lean. I come around and sing that note. And I use a little arm vibrato on the 4 and the 3. I find fourth fingers vibrate nicely if they're stretched. If it's just a curved fourth finger, then sometimes I use a third finger because I have a better third finger vibrato if it's not a stretched finger. Also, the bowing, I go to the middle and then I go to the front, so I can sing on these notes. Now the next thing is playing these 8 notes evenly. 1, 2, and 3. Usually I and then it comes back. And then maybe come down a little crescendo. Just follow the line. So if the line goes up like I do in Bach, then you can make a little crescendo or vibrate more on that note. And maybe the second time, do it a little softer so you don't play the same sequence twice the same way. Then the next thing that, the way I do this, I don't do what's in the score. I do 2 separate notes. I like to make this articulate. Now, we have accents. And in one of my Barenreiter copies, there are no accents. In the other edited part, there are accents. You know, I think that accents and dots have to be taken within the content of the music. So are these accents that you're enraged and you want to kill? No. I think they're just bring out the note with a little vibrato. So I've had students who have auditioned for contests and the judges will say, where are those accents? Where are those accents? You know, I don't think. I know Mendelssohn too well. I'm sure he didn't mean that. You should accent it that strongly. Anyhow, I would just put a little left-hand accent. It's enough for me. Now the other part, and I just gave an example of how I wasn't quite even, is getting these notes evenly. So I use left-hand articulation. You can not knock the strings down heavily, but you can pop, Mr. Cantor calls them popcorn fingers. I like that better. My teacher used to say, knock your fingers down, which helped me to develop stronger left-hand fingers, but you don't really want to hear, you don't want to hear all that tapping. And you don't want to tire your hand out. So I do it very lightly, but I use a little more articulation. And then these wonderful, those have to be even. And this is good preparation for doing the octaves in the Beethoven Concerto. I would start with less bow. Make a crescendo by using more bow. And that's pretty much the first page of Mendelssohn. That takes a couple of months. I did it very quickly now. All right, next concerto, oh my gosh, is Tchaikovsky. Something's wrong with me because it takes me a long time to get through the opening. Uh-oh, maybe that's Mr. Vamos. Should I take it?
Sure, why not?
That's Mr. Vamos. Hi. I'll send her if she's not. I think she's there waiting for you. You may go down. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, he will be home. He's auditioning somebody. All right. So Tchaikovsky takes me a long time to teach the opening. And when I played it myself the other day on tape, by the way, I recommend for people who are advanced, tape yourself all the time. You'll be very surprised. Maybe not pleasantly surprised. I'm never pleasantly surprised. So rhythm in the opening. That's mainly my first gripe, is that it's played funny. The quarter note, and myself, I make the same mistakes too. The quarter notes, quarter note 2/8 are 8s, and there is very little it's not it's a cadenza, but it's not that free. The orchestra's playing ba-dum, ba-ding, ba-ding, ba-dum, ba-dum, and you come in, and it says 126. You can be a little slower than 126, but it's an introduction, and I always say to the student, look, introduction is basically, hello, sit down. I'm going to tell you a story. The story doesn't start until the third line, so it's no use making a meal out of the first two lines. Some people, I think, tend to overdo it. It gets boring. This is a long, long movement. So I like to get on with the story. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. That's the first half of the opening, and then it goes down from there 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. I think it's very important to make the quarter notes and the eighth notes in time, not to change. You know, I hear it's not a waltz. 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then he recommends 80, and I like 80. Legato in the beginning. If you stop all the time, if it's not legato. You have all these stopping points. It really gets boring. So we work a lot on getting the first bow change. I usually suggest go all the ways to the tip where you don't hear the bow change as much. So that's where it's going, and then after that it comes down and you're ready to play the first theme. Again, I suggest not too slow unless you're Perlman and you have such a gorgeous sound and you really have to show it off. But with him, I can take it a little slower. But for myself, I think 80 is good. Again, legato. I turn the bow a little before I change the bow, so you don't hear. I don't want to hear a reiteration of the bow change. Another place, intonation and timing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 1, 2. Now here's another place. Oh, I've heard master classes about this. Open A. Boystruck's edition has an open A. I think it's lovely. I'm not scared of open strings. It's how you do it. If it sticks out, it may be stupid like some people say it is. But I go down, then I vibrate. But for people that cannot stand the open A, I recommend or going. So you can have. You don't want to do it the same way twice. So you look for another way of making it different if you don't like the open A. I don't like to argue about things like that. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So what I do in this concerto is I try to find a story or a way of making each section very interesting because it's a long concerto and it goes on forever. And if you just play it, it's going to get, everybody's heard it before. To me, it's not that interesting anymore. So here, he comes to, and also to always think of Tchaikovsky as a ballet composer. So there are many places where you can make it sound like ballet. For instance, it's the very opening theme. Da-da-da, this very graceful. Feels like, you know, the ballet dancer being thrown by the young man, and she comes down very gently. And then you have a different character here. Very short. Little cadenza. This is boring. Go ahead. You don't need to. Tchaikovsky does this all the time. It's really cute the way he repeats himself. But that's the time I would move it. And you arrive, and then you arrive at the theme again. Another part that I think is quite interesting is, I don't know where it is, but I think I remember, and I've taught enough. So, And then this section, I often hear kind of boring, isn't it? So I try to make two different characters, like in the Nutcracker. I talk about the toy soldiers, very rhythmic. And this again, the ballet dancer. I use very little bow, and you know he has these marks that are wrong, little crescendo diminuendos, which you would think it was, but it's not right. It's a mark by correcting that. It's ours correction is he meant mezzo piano, mezzo forte. You just make a long crescendo in the measure instead of on each one. So I use very little. I want to make it very graceful. Again, like the ballerina being thrown in the air and coming down. So using very little bow and not vibrating these notes, but not accenting with the bow. Lining, and then a little more of it. Then back to the soldiers. So every section you should have a goal of how you want to be expressive, how you want to make it sound very much like ballet. And throughout the concerto, there's these opportunities to become a little bit more interesting than to just play. You're going to be playing 20 minutes. Somebody pointed out yesterday the whole first movement is longer than the Bruch, entire Bruch concerto. Okay, which gives, it's a challenge. And that's why I don't like to give Tchaikovsky too early, because if I'm only talking about third position or second position or something like that, or bowing straight, then we can't get to the music. And by this point, we need to get to the music. Sibelius Concerto, another extremely difficult opening. I think the openings, as always, are, if you're perfect in the opening, it inspires you to be perfect for the rest of the piece. So I like to start out getting the students to play perfectly, and as Sophia in the back will attest, will attest to the fact that the Sibelius opening is very difficult. For me, the opening, the vibrato, finding the kind of vibrato I want, how to come in, it's a lifelong torture for me, always. I finally decided for myself I need to just use a little arm, a narrow finger vibrato. Oh, whether to start down bow or up bow in the Sibelius Concerto. Either way, I used to play down bow all the time, but I had a student who at Northwestern who started up bow, but she had such a gorgeous sound. Her opening was so beautiful that now I'm just imitating my student. That's fun. I like that entrance, and for me, I don't like because then there's no place to go. I want this to have an eerie sound, but I don't want it to be pianissimo, or I want it to be soft but present. So you have the orchestra, dee-da, 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 and then the violin. It's very there, but it's still far away. Then the ecstasy, and then that part, I remember when I was a student, her singer would say my triplets were too fast, and the next week too slow, and the next week too fast, and the next week too slow. And that's what's happening again. I didn't know what he was talking about then, but now every time a student comes in, I'm saying too fast, too slow, too fast, too slow. It should be exactly in time, with also a little bit more emphasis maybe on the F. And 1, 2, now in the score there is some slurs and some people play these separate. I like to always end with the 16 notes at the tip. So I adjusted my bowing according to the 16 notes. The 16th notes often played in a way that I don't like it. Very often they play it just with the fingers. They just use finger motion, and they're too fast. So I like to use well, Mr. Vamos. I should be awake. So that the arm is moving, not just the fingers, which makes it too fast. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1. And then here I recommend saving your bow so that the moving notes are sung, but I don't want at the tip. I want to be heard, but without pressing. I don't want to stick them out, but then I start a little softer and roll. 1, 2, 1. Now another rhythm that is interesting is he goes into, instead of going dum da da dum, he has triplets. Well, if you play the triplets, it used to bother me so much because didn't sound good. But if you interpret it, I think he wants it to be more stronger. If you play it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, then the rhythm makes perfect sense. I always start out with the metronome at 60 because I find that I can play the next section. I used to speed up for the next section, but this is boring if it's too slow. Sibelius supposedly told Oistrakh, "You play it faster than what I had in mind. I like your way better." And I think it just moves better. And then when you get here, here's the same tempo. Again, the 16th notes should be done with a little bit of arm, not just fingers, because then it's too fast. Here on the advice of one of my students who had a lesson with Ida Kafafi, and I changed the bowing from the Francis way. Then this in the score. And by the way, I do keep the score out when I teach just to make sure, and never know, even some scores vary. Then another thing here, some people, they start getting bold right away. I kind of think of something, I have a vision of forest and nymphs are where and then start growing. I don't get too loud yet. It's only mezzo forte. Another favorite spot of mine is when I talk about positions. Here, I'm going to go back, is very hard place to play in tune. It's much easier if you keep your hand in you're not in first position, you're in extension position low, so your wrist is sort of in, and then if you just touch, and then go to fourth, then you have to practice the top notes a little bit. But I find, so 25 years later, I can still play it fairly well in tune. Then the next part, he has little crescendos. I used to think all these crescendos were weird, but then I always think this sounds like an accordion, and then I found out that that was the national instrument in Finland, so I think that's and then velocity, fast. I used to start slowly, but now I start fast. I use the fingering, I don't, on the next page, I use the 4-4-4 that's written in the Francis Gotti edition, but as one of my colleagues in Chautauqua pointed out, this might be more, you might have more luck with intonation if you use 2-1-2-1. Let's, since Mr. Vamos is here, I'm going to, since I've already taught you the Sibelius concerto, boy, these kids move quickly, don't they? All these concertos in one day. We have Brahms and Beethoven. Beethoven is easy. It's a very short introduction, so I'll just start with that. Play in tune. Opening. Again, I think that knowing your positions, and I like to point out that, you know, I don't have perfect pitch, and I don't have time to practice a lot, but I can play it fairly well in tune Thank you, Mishakov, for giving me these positions. If you don't think having the positions a good idea, fine, but I find it very helpful knowing third, open, first position's more open, fingers more curved. I should get I like to start this in tempo, not too slow. And I like the grace notes to be grace notes. I hear sometimes, I don't like that. I use little bow and then more bow as I go, so that it opens up kind of naturally without making crescendos. You don't have to do it. You just start less bow, like you're really scared about the fact that you're going to play octaves next. So scared of more. And then maybe a little different the second time. 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, going down, you hear a lot about you have to be exactly in time. So often what I hear is I feel like somebody's playing an etude, like a not so interesting Kreutzer etude. That's why I suggest starting a little faster and then maybe take a tad of time. 2, 3, 4, 1. Without getting too fast, but also letting it feel like it's rolling, not, you know, pounding out the rhythm that, look, I know that it's I'm not supposed to get faster. So it can be done a little more gracefully. Brahms concerto is the same thing. It's all these concertos, if you notice, I meant to, I don't know if I did, to talk about the rhythm being very important. In Bruch, I certainly talked about it. And so I guess that's the theme, is being rhythmically correct. And everybody will say in Brahms it should be rhythmically correct. I have a bowing that I like. I know Ms. Kafafian likes it very much. We always talk about it. I think I got the idea from a Rostel copy, where instead of going where you're playing all those notes and you're trying to make a crescendo at the tip of the bow, I like to hook these. Some people don't like it, but I find that I don't even know when my students play it. I don't even know they hooked it. I ask them, because you're crossing strings, so it doesn't sound like, so the what I like about it, it keeps me in the lower half, then I can make a crescendo to the top. Keeping it in time. In the olden days, they used to speed up there, take time at the beginning. I try to play the whole thing as steady as I am capable of doing. And then I never trust myself, so I always take out the metronome to make sure that I'm really steady throughout the rest of the part. Looking at the clock, well, I think I have it. Should I continue a little bit more? Let me just go on a little bit more with Brahms. Here's a place where you are now not attached to an 8, so you have to remind the students that it's a triple. These I like short, but not too short. Someplace in between the dot and an 8th note, but not abrupt. And these, not to rush, these notes, and here, the top note's very important. Here I like to use a lot of bow. Maybe pointing out where the harmony changes are, but no matter how in time you play it, somebody will tell you you're not playing in time enough. So then I warn my students, you count, you use the metronome, but somebody will tell you that you have to play it in time. That's a no-win situation. But that's basically, by this time, you probably have, by the time you're in Brahms concerto, probably have a pretty good idea of where your positions are, I hope, and you can concentrate on sound and really fine-tuning your intonation. Intonation in the opening of all these concertos is extremely important, that you start out perfectly so that you continue. If you start out and you're doing a competition and you play the first few lines, you may not even get to warm up because they'll take the tape, they hear it, and they'll put it aside. You're out. So I guess to recap, what's important on the violin? Straight bows, beautiful vibrato. We didn't talk about vibrato too much. Intonation, counting, playing with a lot of musicality and insight into the music. Have I left anything out? It's so easy. This darn instrument is so hard to play. I think I'm going to ask if there are any questions, and then I know this is very brief, and if you disagree with anything I said, just know I disagree with me often too.
So do we have questions? Go ahead.
I have a question about recommended recordings for these concertos.
Okay, I think that many people say don't listen to recordings first. Don't listen to recordings first. Well, that's very difficult. What kid has not heard the Brahms recording 1,000 million times before their teacher takes the music out? So you've been influenced a little bit, and definitely when I play a modern piece, the first thing I do is I look to see if there's a recording so I can make a little bit of, jump ahead a little bit and know what's going on. I tell my students when they ask me, what is the recording you like the most? I usually say, listen to 10. Then you're not copying anyone, but if you get, I think Eugene Lehner said, copying is, it's legal, what is the word for it? Plagiarism, legal in music. If you hear somebody play something and it's gorgeous, and you want to do it and it makes sense to you, we learn to speak by listening to other people talk. This is great. Listen and copy if you love it, and it's great to hear recordings you don't like to, because you know why you don't like it. It makes sense to you. Okay, this is what I don't like. This is what I do like. So listening a lot, I don't think it can hurt you. Whether you should get ideas. Look, when my student comes in, you can see I'm very strong ideas about every concerto and how I teach it. So they're getting ideas from me. What's wrong with them getting an idea from Heifetz or Oistrakh or James Ennis or whoever's the newest winner of the Indianapolis competition, or some of the nice semi-finalists that didn't make it? Definitely listen, but don't feel that somebody says this is the only recording you should listen to. That could be harmful because you might miss out on something. It could be even one note that you love from this other recording, and you decide that I've got to take. That's such a great idea.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
I have some question regarding practice technique. I was wondering, can you talk about some practice technique for like upper tempo staccato and even the ricochet bowing like in end of the first movement of Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, and also like how to practice 10th, like Wieniawski, the first Violin Concerto, if you can.
I could talk about those things, but we could have Mr. Bain and let him talk because he's the practice. We're getting a feedback here. Are we supposed to?
No, it's gone now. I don't know what was up.
Okay. So let's start with upper staccato. How do you teach that? Here, you can sit down.
Well,
This is Mr. Bamos.
There's no real way to learn how to play staccato. What you do is you start out, if you're doing upper staccato, you start out somewhere around the tip, and you make a short stroke, and you stop. And you make another short stroke, and you stop. And if possible, you might make a small pinch with your forefinger, just to get a bite in each of these notes. Now, at a certain point, you gain speed gradually, and when you get to a certain point, you perhaps just put your hand there. Now this is one in which you're actually creating a staccato with each with your forefinger on your right hand. There's another way in which you just do a slight pressure and then just move forward and stop, move forward and stop. And this is
Tighten
what
the
you
wrist
call,
actually, and the arm,
yeah.
and the arm will tighten. You
Yeah.
tighten the wrist. Usually you do combination, don't you?
Well, yeah, you can either use all arm, or you can use a little bit of wrist, or a little bit of both. The idea is there's no real answer to staccato. You just do it.
Well, you usually have good luck if you do the metronome. You have the students starting out slow tempo and adding.
Yeah, well, this, of course, it's almost a dirty word. Use the metronome. But by and large, if you take it, you start with the metronome going, and then you just put it up so little that you can't hear the difference, but you know that the metronome has gone up a little bit, and out of 1 minute, maybe there's one more click that's going to take place. In the course
And then you stop before you can't do it anymore, and then you start again with slow tempo. You don't go beyond the tempo where you can't control. Is that what you do?
Oh, well, you never go beyond the tempo that you control. You just go up to how far you can control, and little by little, just by doing it every day, somehow or other, your hand will start controlling it at a faster and faster speed. Now, this is a controlled staccato. There are those that are more fortunate than the rest of us that have one of these electric staccatos where they just put their hand there and then just go. And how do they do that? They don't know, and we don't know, but it's very, very fast.
It's like vibrato. Some people start out, they can have a vibrato after the first lesson.
Yeah.
And others take years.
And so they'll put their hand there, and then they'll go. Now, the problem is they're liable to have, in fact, I had a lot of students like this, they would have a slow staccato, pop, 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 a little fast, pop, 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 pop. And then the next one is just going like hell. So basically, then what you have to do is spend the next 2 years probably trying to get the slow part gradually a little bit faster, get the fast part gradually a little slower until they finally meet and you have a complete staccato that goes from at any beat on the metronome. And that, of course, takes, well, there's no time limit, however long it takes the individual person to get.
Talk about the Mendelssohn, the ricochet bowing. How do you teach that?
Well, you're talking about the...
Yeah, that was my question. So, great. Go ahead.
Great. Well, what you do is take the bow above the string and just make a slightly oval motion, because you have to go across the 4 strings, and allow the bow to bounce 4 times. Pakataka. Now, starting off the string again, go up, pakataka. And you do that a bunch of times, and then you make it 5 notes. Pakataka da, so that you can get a good grab on the up bow. So taka pakata, pakataka ba. And after a while, pakataka ba. And you just gradually do this, but always keeping a relaxed hand, because if you tighten your hand, the first thing that's going to happen is the hairs of the bow will just start clinging to the string, and you'll stop losing. You'll lose your stuff here going.
You also mentioned that it should be parallel to if the bow is going at an angle, it's not going to bounce. It's got to be really parallel.
Yeah, well, that's something that, of course, no student has ever been taught. You have to have a straight bow.
Parallel to the bridge.
Yeah, you have to be parallel to the
And
bridge.
flat bow sometimes helps too for that, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
I was taught to do with a flatter bow parallel to the bridge, and then after you do that off the string, you do it from the string and just give it a whack, because it's really an on the string bowing. Well, it's what I mean is it's not. It's you play from the string and it goes off.
Yeah. Well, I
You
mean,
don't start from above.
You know, I actually started from above.
Okay. So here's where we have two different ways. I actually start teaching it from the string, getting the bow and then using less bow. And then since mine's not working so well, I probably try his way too. But when I started, and I give a whack on the.
Yeah, if you give a whack, sometimes you have to give a whack in both directions. It all depends on your bow. Or just. But if you can give enough of a whack on the down bow, it might last 8 notes until the next slight whack. And after a while, you find you have less and less whack until you really you've got a balance, and the bow just goes and it just bubbles. I don't even say going off; it just bubbles on the string and gives you that. So there's a little attack on those notes, so they cut through the orchestra while the orchestra's playing the melody.
Next question.
Next question.
Next question.
One that we didn't answer that Henry asked.
Something about
I have a question. Could you maybe go over your sequence of etudes and maybe talk about some etudes that correlate with some of the concertos?
Well, you know, when we talk about etudes, all right, let's narrow that down and make 2 definitions. One which we'll call exercises, and the other which we'll call etudes. Because you've got 3 things. You've got exercises, which you can play. You could have a frontal or bottom. It won't make any difference. You're not making music. You're just playing notes. And so those exercises are physical things that you try to develop. And then on the third thing, skipping the second for a moment, is the actual playing of the music. Now you have to find something that's going to bring you from the deadpan exercises to the actual playing of the music. And that...
She wants to know an order of the exercises.
Or etudes.
Or etudes. Let's say the etudes. And then you can give the... why don't you give etudes and then give the order of the...
Well, you know, etude, first of all, I believe that everybody should learn all the exercises and all the etudes that were written. So I mean, it'll keep you busy, and you're never going to feel like you've got nothing to do, because there's always something to do.
Would you say Wolfhard?
Well, if you start early enough, well, let's say Wolfhard is fine. Let's start with Wolfhard Book 1, followed by Wolfhard Book 2, and then I usually start with I go from there usually to Mazur's Book 1, and then Mazur's Book 2. I skip Mazur's Book 3 till near the end. It's quite a hard book, very complicated bowings. But after Mazur's, I might go to the Don't Opus 37, which is preparatory to Kreutzer, and then I start beating his head against the wall with Kreutzer, and go through Kreutzer. No, wait, did I said...
You said don't, but there's the next don't.
Now that I'm going to wait even longer. After that, I might give... yeah, okay. Fiorello would be a good one to follow after that. And after Fiorello, Brody, and Gavinier. And meanwhile, I don't wait till I finish all these to start the Paganini Caprices. I might start the Paganini Caprices even around the time I'm doing Kreutzer, so that we can do that. I don't necessarily start out with Kreutzer with Paganini Caprice number 1. First of all, those 24 caprices were not written at the same time. Paganini didn't write 24 caprices. He wrote, I think, 12 caprices. And then at a later time, he wrote 6 more caprices. And then at a later time again, he wrote 6 more caprices. And probably the first 12 are the hardest. I mean, everybody makes a big fuss about Paganini number 24, but the only thing that's hard about Paganini 24 is the fact that it has so many different kinds of techniques, and you can't play it unless you can do all of those different techniques. Well, as soon as you get done with the theme, which is rather easy, you have flying staccato, and you either have it or you don't. And then you have to have a good bow changing strings, and then you have to have octaves. And octaves, octaves are supposed to be easy, but octaves are either perfect or they sound like the word I'm not supposed to say. Okay, so basically, and then when you do octaves, you have to listen.
Which Paganini do you start
Uh,
when you're teaching?
Okay, when we start with different Paganinis, I start with what I think, this is quotation mark, I think is the easiest one, and this is number 14. But yes, if there's a girl that has a rather small hand, or not too wide palms, and short fingers, maybe number 14 might be a little hard because she's got all these stretches to do to get the 2 and 3 part chords. So maybe that might not be always the best thing for a little-handed person to start with. But then after that, I would probably do number 13 after 14, and then I would do number 20. 16, yes, I would do 16 because 16 could be considered either not so terribly hard, or if you do it, you listen to a good recording of it, and they go really fast, and then all of a sudden it becomes very problematic.
I think you should also explain that when you teach the Paganini caprices, you mean for them to study it 3 times more. So
well, you never finish with Paganini.
You go through them rather quickly, and then you go back to them and start perfecting them, right?
Yeah, well, what I usually do is I take a Paganini caprice, have the student work on it for a week. The next week, I listen to it and tell them to keep plugging away and work for another week. And then the 3rd week, I say, well, okay, while you spend the 3rd week doing this, to see how far you can go before you pack it up for the time being, while you're doing the 3rd week, let's start another Paganini. And then at the end of that 3rd week, you just drop first caprice, and you start your 2nd week of this second caprice. And then the 3rd week of that, you already start. So you spend 2 weeks working on a caprice, and the 3rd week, while you're working on that caprice, you add another caprice. And you work your way through all 24. Now, none of them are going to be perfect, but as you're doing these, your technique is improving, and you're getting to be a better and better and better and better instrumentalist, so that when you finish one caprice and you go to the next caprice, you're taking the technique that you've already developed from the previous caprice into the learning of this of the next caprice. So you're really getting better all the time.
Hey, Roland, also talk about then the exercises that you say you don't need to be too musical, and don't forget to include Roland Vamos' exercise book and the scale book coming out, which is not published yet.
Yeah, that would be nice if we could get into talking about these techniques in your books.
Yeah, well, first of all, there was an exercise, a double stop book that I studied when I was prenatal. I was about, I guess, 11, 12 years old. It was a double stop book by a Russian pedagogue called Sergei Korguov. I used it quite effectively, it helped me quite a bit, and I used it for many years as a warm-up exercise. And then I, somewhere along the line, decided that it was missing a few things. And so I started adding some things to it. I added something before it, just to get the double stop combinations in your hands. And then you say, oh, okay, well, first I want to make sure that the first joint of my left hand is flexible. So I would move the first joint of my first finger forward and back a half step, then I would do the second finger a half step, and then the third finger, and then the fourth finger, just to make sure, because that first joint is your ticket to making adjustments.
And this is for viola and violin.
Yeah, okay, if you saw that. Okay, yeah. So this basically it started out by being a series of double stop exercises by Korgoff, and I decided to re-edit it because it hadn't been re-edited since I think something like 1931, and so I wanted to put it out again and call it Korgoff as I Teach It by Roland Vamos. I received a phone call telling me, oh, this is still under publication and I'm still under copyright and you can't do this. We've decided that we're going to republish it and we're going to have Tanaka do the soundtrack for this. And so basically that I said thank you for letting me know, and I won't do Korgoff. And I hung up, and then I found out if you make one small change, you could call it your own. And I not only made a small change, I added things to it. I added something before the exercise, and then I did the exercise, then I added a bowing component to it. So my gosh, the exercise was more than half mine anyhow. So I just changed it to the Roland Vamos double stop exercises.
Do you want to talk about the various bowings and what they're good for? Do you want your viola?
Well, here I got a violin over here. You don't have to bother taking the viola out.
And I have an excuse because he's not a violinist. So
Okay, that's
let
her
me take
excuse.
let me take this off because he doesn't need to shoulder us.
Okay, so then what was I doing?
The bonus for the exercise.
Okay, so after you've done the bowing, the actual exercise,
Slowly, of course.
yeah, all slowly. I just get that. Then I would start at the frog of the bow and just do this series of exercises, each one 4 times. 3, 4. Fourth one I hook, just so I can be up bow. Now, triples. Backward. Then, and in doing that, I pick both fingers up together and put them down together. So it's reverse the bowing. Now 3, 4. So that just so that I'm using that double stop that I've just learned, that double stop exercise, and putting it into some context with the bow. Then I do the same thing in second position, but when I do the bowing exercise, instead of doing it here, I do it here. That's 7 positions. Next day, when I do the exercise and I do the bowings, I don't start out frog, middle, tip, frog, middle, tip, frog. I start middle, tip, frog, middle, tip, frog, middle. And the third day, I do tip, frog, middle, tip, frog, middle, tip. So at the end of 3 days, I've done the exercise in 7 positions 3 times, and I've done the bowings at the frog, at the middle, and the tip in all positions. And then start all over again.
Roland, just because of time, he asked the question about tense. Do you do any tense in your exercise book?
You know, I don't do that in this exercise book. However, there's no reason why you can't do that. Except, why bother doing it in the book? I take a look. If you have some exercise or a piece of music that has some, well, it's not going to have tense thing stationary. I mean,
there's the flesh scale.
I think he also asked about like the beginning of Wieniawski 1, right, Henry? Yeah, so beginning of Wieniawski 1, dun, 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 like how would you practice that?
A lot.
A lot, carefully.
Well, you know, what you do is you have.
That's not even so hard because it's not in the first.
So, you know, you just at first. Those two, both of them are going down a half step. Again, they're both moving exactly in the same way. They're not, you know, I say either when you go from one consecutive tenth to another, you're either opening, or you're closing, or you're just remaining the same. Those are the 3 possibilities that you've got. So the first one, you're just staying still. Now there, that was a major tenth. So you have minor tenth, minor tenth, minor tenth, minor tenth, major tenth. Major tenth, you have to open your hand out a little bit. So just by knowing in advance that you're opening or closing or you're remaining the same, you already have pretty well a good idea of what your hands are doing. Then, of course, you have to practice for fine-tuning, and that we spend our lives learning how to play in tune. And that's a given. That you never stop. I think Heifetz, at one point, said, you know, people think that I play perfectly in tune. No, I have this as many problems as anybody else. I adjust faster.
And that's from a lot of slow practicing and hearing because you're tuning your ear.
Yeah, I mean, so he may hit a note a slight bit off, but he's going to adjust it so fast that our ear is not going to hear it. And then see, my God, what a fantastic technique. Now, do you have another question, Stacey?
Uh-oh.
I don't read the unmute. Yeah, we have a question about the difference in when you're switching a student from violin to viola, or let's say they're just going to play both instruments. Do you have any special exercises or technique? What do you think the difference is between playing the violin and the viola technically, and what the students need to learn?
Well, you know, I try to make it that there's no difference. The only difference, obviously, is that your hand goes out farther, this hand goes out farther, but you still have a boat that has to go straight. So instead of being here straight, your hand is out farther and you're straight. Instead of being here, you back your hand up a little more. Instead of having your hand in this shape, you open your hand a little bit, open your palm out a little bit. And so the basic thing is playing tune.
You know, some people talk about the viola sound being different than the violin sound, but actually I find that going from the E string to the G string, you're doing the same thing as going from the G string to the C string. You know, you're just going, it's a thicker string, so your vibrato will be a little bit wider. So you make actually these same adjustments that you do from string to string, except, and then if it's a thicker string, if your A string is thicker, you might want to play more deeply into the string or flatten your bow more. But it's basically musically your ear is telling you this is what you have to do. Then when they talk about a viola sound, I feel like, yeah, it's the same thing we talk about on the violin on each string. It's a different way of producing the sound. Drawing the bow a little slower maybe on the G string than you would on the E string.
Yeah, and maybe the vibrato a little bit more wide rather than narrow.
Well, that plus also the instrument is a little bit bigger, and so you have a little bit more weight going into the string. With a violin, peaks right away. On the viola, you might have to just pull a little bit more just to get the thicker string and longer string vibrating.
Good. Okay, do we have other questions? No? Yes?
Are we going to go over Walton and Bartok?
Yes, can we talk about the openings of the Walton and Bartok concertos for viola?
What when you say open
You want a
of
viola?
those concertos?
Oh,
Well, it doesn't make that much difference. I'll play the fifth higher, or actually it's just
I think you need a viola.
yeah, probably do. Well, first of all openings are individual depending on what the music calls for. Actually, there were two different renditions of the Walton of the Bartok concerto. That's not a bow and arrow.
We're going to start with Bartok.
Yeah, the original, the edition that Bartok, when he wrote this concerto, he wrote to Primrose, who was going to be the person that was going to give it premiere performance, and probably was going to take it around and perform it many times and put it on the map. So he wrote to him and he said, well, I've finished the concerto. Now all I've got is the mundane thing about just putting it down on paper. And unfortunately, he died before he got it down on paper. And so then Tibor Surly, who was a violist in his own right, and he was a composition student of Bartok's, spent 2 years trying to piece together the Bartok concerto from backs of envelopes that he wrote. He might write a little note here in the back of an envelope or a sheet of manuscript paper, something, and collating all of this together into a concerto that made sense. And so you might say that the Bartok concerto, the Tibor Surly arrangement, is pretty much a collaboration between Bartok and Tibor Surly. Later on, Peter Bartok, Bartok's son, and Paul Neubauer, a very fine violist, the two of them decided that Surly took too many liberties, and they didn't like what he did, so they put together their own edition of the Bartok concerto, which had some much higher position playing way up in the stratosphere, and quite a bit hotter, and maybe not as musically satisfying, because most violists that I know of today don't use the Peter Bartok or Neubauer edition, but rather they use the Tibor Surly one. And that's the one that usually everybody does use now. So, now, what was the question?
Do you want to maybe play a little, or like how you teach the opening, or what's important about the opening?
Well, there's nothing different than any other concerto. I mean, if it starts out, all right, very often the way most people play that, they start out in fourth position, and they stay there. I elected to start in third position and then go down, but the reason was because I wanted a shift going up to the second phrase. I wanted to, and you can't get that if you're in the same position. So I changed the fingering, because what I do, and I do this with most people that I play, I first sing it to myself, and if I find that I'm doing something with my throat, I'm not going to, but now there's a little gliss in my voice. So now I'm going to try to find a way to get a gliss on the viola. And I can't get that if I'm in the same position. I'm not going to do that. So, so I make a little gliss. And so what we do is we sing it. And we pay attention to what our body is doing, what our throats are doing, what our voice is doing. And then we say, now, how can I translate that onto the viola? And that is, I think, the answer for anybody's interpretation on the violin, the viola, the contrabassoon, you name it. It doesn't make any difference to you when you're, if you sing something, then try to imitate what you're doing with your voice. Now, of course, I've heard vocalists say, we must always imitate the violin. And of course, the violinists always say we're imitating the voice. So, whichever you say, I like to think that the violin imitates the voice. Voice is the body interpreting, whereas we've got this inanimate object and this other inanimate object, and we're trying to put them together to make them sound like the human voice.
Mm-hmm. Good. Could you talk a little bit, going to the Walton Concerto, could you talk a little bit about that concerto and how you approach the opening to the Walton Viola Concerto?
Yeah, well, you know, reverse from the very beginning, you've got beautiful legato that you've got to get. Just to get a nice smooth sound, and you have to make differences in phrases. So, now here, suddenly you've got, the first one was up a minor third, up a major ninth. So, now a major seventh. So you've got all these skips, and those skips are what make the melody so interesting. If you just have everything just clustered around one another, it wouldn't be as effective. So, very smooth bow. So, like any beautiful singing melody, I mean, there's nothing different that I would do with the Walton than I would do with any other concerto or any other sonata. I would try to sing. I would try to get beautiful bow, legato bow changes, and whenever I shift, I always have to think, is this shift going to be a melodic shift where I want to hear the shift, or is it going to be a utilitarian shift where I got to get from here to there and it's nobody's business but my own? You know, so you always have to decide. And then, of course, when you say, okay, I want it to be a melodic shift. Now, so if you're going to go, am I going to shift on the old finger, or am I going to shift on the new finger? Yeah, I'm shifting on the old finger. I'm shifting on the old, or and I always think of two violinists playing Trommerei by Schumann, Heifetz and Mischa Elman. Mischa Elman would probably have shifted on the old finger. He shifted on the old, and Heifetz probably would have done. And the two completely different kinds of shifts. And I usually make adjectives up as to, or use adjectives to describe the different shifts. I would call Mischa Elman's shift a voluptuous shift. Heifetz's I would make more of a sensuous shift. Now, how you arrive, how you vibrate, there are many complicated things about a shift. You think that a shift is a simple thing, but how you approach the shift, how you actually maneuver the shift, how you arrive at the shift, are all things that you have to bring into your interpretation. But shift is a complicated thing. When you have a shift, light bulbs come on in your mind. Now, how do I want to execute this? Complicated.
Good. Great. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? I think that we're good, and I think that it's probably our time is coming to an end. I have to rush off to teach my class now. And Mr. Vamos, thank you so much. Mrs. Vamos, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was really wonderful, and we really appreciate your time and all of that. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us. See you all soon. Bye-bye.